Could the people in physical plant please turn on the air conditioning? Before I introduce the speaker, allow me also to introduce and to welcome to this ceremony the Reverend Dr. Peter Thompson, who just agreed to us. Reverend Thompson is a Co-1978 graduate. After leaving Co, he was educated at Princeton, Louisville seminaries. He's an ordained Presbyterian minister and has served as a minister for more than 20 years, served both in New England and now in Florida. There's a number of family connections with Co. A half dozen members of his family have graduated or will graduate from Co. One in the human form tomorrow, one Scott Holland, a nephew. I want to thank Reverend Thompson for his willingness to participate in this year's baccalaureate ceremony. Our baccalaureate speaker this year is Dr. Mary Johnston. Mary came to Co as our college chaplain in 1994. In her time here, she has expanded the size and scope of the chaplaincy, developing programs for members of the Christian, Jewish, Muslim, and Buddhist faith traditions. She provides pastoral care to all members of the Co community, as well as leading services, Bible study, and campus ceremonies. Mary was trained in theology at Princeton, and she has had extensive experience in counseling. Her preparation, in fact, could not have been better for the role she has come to play at Co, a role for which every member of this community is truly grateful. She is a wonderful chaplain. We are delighted to have her as part of our community. Delighted to have her here today. Among Mary's many abilities is her talent for offering clear, insightful, and thought-provoking comments on occasions such as this. And so it is wonderfully welcome and appropriate that in this co-sesquicentennial year, Mary Johnston, the college's chaplain, one of our own, should present the baccalaureate sermon. Please join me in welcoming the chaplain of Co College, Dr. Mary Johnston.
Thank you, President Pfeiffer. This is a real joy for me to be speaking here today. And as some of you know, this is unusual because typically the baccalaureate speaker comes from outside of Co. And so when President Pfeiffer asked me to come over in October and asked me to do this today, I was really surprised and pleased and quite impressed with myself and with the President's good judgment until, always an until, I came across this quote by Bob Dole in Time magazine. He said, "The role of commencement speaker is similar to the role played by a body at a funeral. They cannot hold the event without one, but nobody expects it to say very much." And I realized in a second that that was true for baccalaureate speakers as well. This summer marks my 20th year in ordained ministry. And over the years, I've heard a lot of advice about preaching. In fact, I heard another piece of advice just yesterday from a faculty member who was in my office in a very supportive way. He said that he was looking forward to hearing what I had to say. And then as he turned to go, he said, "As long as it's short." And I'm known for my short sermons, so those of you who are overheated, please relax. This won't take long. I've heard other advice, including from my family. Early in my career, my younger sister sent me a cartoon, and it pictured a minister in the pulpit saying to the congregation, "In order to balance last week's 26-point sermon, this week's sermon will be pointless." Well, please believe me, I'm not going to hold you here until I cover 26 points, but I'm also hoping that you won't find this pointless. So this brings us to the reading from the Gospel of Mark. I'm always fascinated by this reading every time I hear it. It's an interesting peek at a conversation between Jesus and the disciples And Jesus is trying valiantly to tell the disciples, his friends, about his impending death. And he's doing this out of a kindness. He's trying to prepare them. He wants them to know what to expect and what to anticipate for the future. But as you can imagine, this is really very difficult for them. And it's confusing. It's certainly not what they want. And they don't really want to deal with it. Instead, they talk about what's uppermost in their minds, which is their position in the group. The scripture says that they discussed with one another who was the greatest. And so it appears that they were vying for position. This reminded me of a story that I heard about a mother who was making pancakes for her young son. And as she was stirring the batter, their eager little faces right close to her, they started arguing about who was going to get the first pancake. And she saw this as sort of a teachable moment, a time for a moral lesson. And she said, you know, boys, if Jesus were here, he would say, let my brother have the first pancake. I can wait. Her one son, Kevin, turned to the other and said, okay, Ryan, you be Jesus. Now, we adults, we're a little more sophisticated than that. We're a little better at hiding our impulses, so we appear humble, but it's still hard. I remember a retreat leader talking about leading a retreat on Christian humility. And he said at the beginning of the retreat, when everyone was gathering, they understood intellectually the importance of humility. But he said by the end of the retreat, everyone was competing to see who could be the most humble. It seems like it's part of the human condition. Jesus addressed it 2,000 years ago, and here we are, still trying to get it right. So hearing the reading for today is sort of a good news, bad news thing. I mean, if the disciples didn't automatically know how to be humble, what chance do the rest of us have? Maybe belonging to a church or a synagogue or a mosque won't do the trick. Maybe being a college graduate doesn't make it any easier. I know being a college chaplain doesn't. Just out of my own confession, I have to say there are days when I love being a chaplain. I love working with students and living and sharing the good news as easy as breathing. But there are other days. There are bad days. Days when everything goes wrong. And I'm whining on the inside because I don't think chaplains should whine on the outside too much. And I go home and I look in my mail and I open a newsletter to find that one of my colleagues has received some kind of recognition. And my shadow side comes out and says, how does he rate? And so it goes. The writer of James is well aware of this human dilemma and advises putting away bitter jealousy, selfish ambition, and in their place show works in the meekness of wisdom. It's an interesting phrase, meekness of wisdom, because we don't oftentimes use those two words together, meekness and wisdom. The word wisdom conjures up images of something big, grand, commanding. And the word meekness is linked more to things that are small and unassuming and mild. Last fall, I had the pleasure of working with Simone Cesar, a student here at Coe. It was during a prospective student visit day. And we talked about a lot of things that day, but one thing she told me about was working in the Sequoia National Forest. And I've always been, interested in the sequoias, which are also known as the giant redwoods. She told me a lot about these trees, that they can grow to be 300 feet tall and 3,000 years old and 30 feet around. But the really unusual thing about these trees is that they have a very shallow root system that reaches out far and wide in all directions. And it does this for a couple of reasons. One is so that it can absorb as much moisture as possible, because each tree needs 800 to 1,000 gallons of water per day. And also they reach out in order to intertwine with other roots to give them support. Now, the first time that I ever heard about these root systems was as an illustration for community. And, you know, that lesson is there. We all do need one another in order to stand strong and to thrive. But, you know, I think there's an even more profound lesson in the redwood. Because these long, absorbing roots, stretching in all directions, are there to receive, to soak up all that life has to give them. And then from these humble threads emerges a giant. I want you to take a few moments right now and picture in your mind someone you know who is wise. Someone you respect, someone who has awareness and insight, knowledge, emotional and spiritual balance, someone whose personal stature reaches beyond most other people. Now, how did she or he get that way? My guess is that it was probably not by arguing about who is the best, like the disciples, and probably not by selfish ambition. But my guess is that, like the roots of the redwood, this person has been willing to receive, to absorb, to soak up all that life has to give in all of its dimensions, the joys and the sorrows, the easy and the difficult, the celebrations and the disappointments, and using all the material of life, emerges a giant. The 12th century abbot named Bernard of Clairvaux said it this way: if you are wise, you will show yourself a reservoir and not a canal. For a canal pours out as fast as it takes in, but a reservoir waits till it is full and so communicates its surplus. There are very few reservoirs at the present, though we have canals of plenty. They are ready to pour out, though they have not been in-poured. They are eager to exercise authority over others, though they have not yet learned to rule themselves. Be filled yourself, then, but discreetly mind. Pour out of thy fullness. End quote. Last fall, I had the experience of taking my daughter to college. And recently I was reminiscing with my parents about this, and I said, you know, when I left her there, I just hoped that she had the survival skills to be on her own. And my dad, a semi-crusty retired farmer, said, what do you mean survival skills? You were just taking her to college, not leaving her on an ice floe. But the truth is, and maybe some of you can relate back to this, there were times when I felt like I had left her on an ice floe. And when she's honest, she'll tell you there are times when she felt that way too. And you know, I've been talking to parents for years about the issues that come with leaving a son or a daughter at college. And I think I did a pretty okay job. But this year I became wiser. And when I talk to parents now, something has changed. This past year has held challenges for many of us here. some of them private, some of them very public. I had a religion professor in college who used to say that maturity is knowing the worst there is to know, yet still holding out for the best. Knowing the worst there is to know, yet still holding out for the best. You see, there has to be both. Because if we focus only on the worst there is to know, we're going to become cynical and fatalistic. But if we focus only on the best, like the disciples were doing in our reading for today, we will become superficial and petty. But when we can look into the face of reality with all of its horrors and still hold out hope, we become wise. Graduating seniors, you've faced your share of hard times over the last 4 or so years. You had to in order to sit where you are today. You've persevered. You've held out hope, and I commend you for that. My guess is also that you've figured out by now, you've become wise enough to know, that when you leave Co, there will be much more to learn, to absorb, to take in. And if you let yourself receive it, your wisdom will grow. But of course, the lessons from James and from the Gospel of Mark aren't only for you. They're for all of us gathered here today. We've looked into the face of our reality, and sometimes it has been painful, and it has been difficult. But the good news, according to the letter of James, is that when we can let go of our fear, our bitterness, our jealousy, our selfish ambition, our realities won't destroy us. They make us wise. That is my deep desire for you, and for me, and for all of us. For in the words of James, this wisdom is from above, and it is pure, peaceable, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruit.